Good afternoon. Welcome to another edition of Anglican Unscripted. I'm Kevin Carlson.
And I'm George Conger.
And we hope you enjoy today's show. All right, George, we got another show under our belts, and then we're going to start a new Anglican Unscripted. Last week we talked about fun things like, MTV for our This Day in History. Well, This Day in History brings us back to the church, actually. We're going to talk a little bit about Gene Robinson, who, through no fault of his own, made AnglicanTV possible and kept you employed for many years as well.
Yeah.
It was this week in history, that the House of Bishops voted to, what do they actually do when they vote?
2003 General Convention in Minneapolis. House of Bishops affirmed the election of Gene Robinson as Bishop of New Hampshire, followed the next day by the House of Deputies.
Right. And that set into motion just almost 7-8 years here of constant news, some of it good, some of it bad, and changed the church forever. And let's go through, not really a timeline, but some of the bigger events. Some that I can think of would be the emergency meeting in London with Griswold, which actually happened before the election. But we had Dramantine, we had Nottingham, the Windsor Report, panel reference. How were these notable in the history of the church?
Well, I think one indicator is that first primates meeting right after General Convention, before Gene Robinson was consecrated in November. That was at Lambeth Palace. I can remember standing outside the palace, and I remember a bus pulling up, and Christiane Amanpour from CNN popped out of the bus, and all the street lights went on. And in 2006, the General Convention, we had CNN and Fox there to talk about a new presiding bishop and all the fighting. It was a woman, the first, and woman presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church. And at our last church meeting, I think maybe me, you, David Virtue, and Weehawken Press Journal were the only ones there.
Yes.
We've gone through an arc of overwhelming coverage to it's almost passé.
Well, it really has been passé because of the church didn't split on TV. It split behind the scenes, and it fragmented behind the scenes. The camera showed up and wanted this big explosion. They're hoping for Jeffrey Shorey or some Bishop Duncan to put on boxing gloves and take to the ring, but all the fragmentation happened behind the scenes. Happened when the church met in Dar es Salaam. Happened with the panel of reference, the Windsor Report, when the Orthodox bishops here in America went down to Camp Allen. This was behind cameras and wasn't really open to the press. But our church has forever changed because, not of anything Gene Robinson himself did, but because of the event.
Gene Robinson led to the election of Catherine Jefferts Schori. Catherine Jefferts Schori led to the formation of the ACNA. And the Episcopal Church's relationship with the Anglican Communion and Rowan Williams led to GAFCON. We have had almost an inevitable progression of splits and breaks, and it's not benefited anybody. Well, one of the things the supporters of Bishop Robinson said would be that people would flock to the Episcopal Church after his election.
Right.
Well, it hasn't happened.
No. I think what the election of Gene Robinson showed us is two things. The first being that the Anglican Communion is not structured to handle this type of crisis. There's no place in this colonial type of architecture to handle when a church goes this far off base. The second thing is that they won't flock. The Episcopal Church has lost on average 3 to 5% of its membership per year, which is about the size of a diocese each year.
A big major diocese essentially is walked out each year. And these people aren't being replaced. No. They're either dying or they're walking away.
Right. So
I mean, I look at my own family. My parents, and my 3 brothers, none of them go to Episcopal churches anymore. And me, I'm in the union.
What can you do? Yeah, you're still in tech, and you're a tech clergy. I look at Anglican TV. Our success was because of one event in 2003 when the House of Bishops decided, yeah, we can do this.
In 2002, before Gene Robinson's election, in 2002, George Carey, the Archbishop of Canterbury, told me in an interview that this issue of homosexuality was the most profoundly divisive issue in the church since the Reformation. We're at a period of change just as profound as the split between Protestants and Catholics 500 years ago.
Yeah, and that's proven itself over and over. All right, thus endeth our first story, George. Let's move on. Oh, let's take a commercial break first. Hold on.
Hi, I'm Phil Ashey from the American Anglican Council. Every week we produce a 2-minute teaching video on a current event from an Orthodox Anglican perspective. Come join us at americananglican.org/Anglican Perspective.
All right, that commercial helped paid for a fraction of our services. I'm going to put a URL here for those who want to donate. Let's see, it'll be about this big and this big. Oh, there we go. And it should say AnglicanTV/donate. You want to click on that to help donate to the show. That keeps George and I on camera. And it's if you enjoy us and you like the news, you want to click the button. Let's move on to some more stories. The Anglican Church is based and founded in the Church of England, and that's actually in London. And London's been very busy this week with riots.
This is criminality, pure and simple, and it has to be confronted and defeated.
This is I think this is a terrible shock to people in England, because it started off as a local riot in response to somebody being shot by the police. That sort of thing can happen in Los Angeles or Newark or whatever. But then it developed into 4 nights of looting and criminality. And it just is profoundly disheartening to the people of England. And I've read accounts and I've talked with vicars in South London and North London, and they describe how their communities are being destroyed. And it's not the local people going out in the street fighting the power, but criminal gangs looting shops, kids on Blackberries using social networks and media to say, okay, let's get to the Debenhams, set it on fire because the police are 3 blocks away. It was an anarchy at some point.
It really was. It's hard to explain when you see something like this because we've watched civilized societies so much through our televisions. But there's been some type of development over the ages of, I would call it a welfare state, a socialist state, where people have been given something and expect something. You are provided this much in compensation if you don't have a job. You're provided this much in compensation if you don't have food. You're provided this much in compensation if you don't have a BlackBerry. And that is catching up with Europe. Europe under France and England and let's include Greece for all that matter, has really starting to see the wages of sin that's found in giving something for nothing.
I think you're absolutely right, Kevin. And though it may be simplistic to blame the Labour government and socialism, but I think politicians and the educated classes, the ruling classes of England, are equally to blame for the state of affairs. The Archbishop of Canterbury gave a wonderful speech in the House of Lords and it really might be the sort of speech that allows him to really pick and find an issue that he can do well.
There is nothing to romanticize and there is nothing to condone in the behavior that has spread across our streets. This is indeed criminality. Criminality pure and simple? Perhaps, but as the Prime Minister reminded us, criminality always has a context.
He condemned absolutely the violence as, and I'll quote, criminality pure and simple.
Yeah.
But then he went on to say, what we need is a reform of the education system, a reform of our culture where people are taught virtue and how to be good citizens, not just how to be occupied or entertained. And I think here is, I think you can blame all sorts of people. You know, there have been people on the TV in England saying, oh, it's because the government cut grants by 8% and people are getting less welfare. Other people saying, oh, we should just, you know, get out the water cannons and blow these people away. I've talked to some people, vicars in England, in London, who say basically this is just evidence the fact of the sin and fallen society.
Yeah, it's evidence of a post-Christian society. You know, we've seen Christianity in Europe itself just fall in the last 80 years, 120 years. It's just, you know, empty churches everywhere, and declining churches, falling apart churches, and society as a whole has really become human secularism to its fullest extent.
I compare this to what happened in the wake of Katrina.
Sure.
And that you had only in New Orleans that you have this sort of criminality where a concentrated pocket of people who depend upon the welfare system to get for their families, for their housing, for everything, a small minority basically played havoc and chaos. When you had these tornadoes in Alabama or Missouri, or hurricanes in Florida, the flooding in Minot, North Dakota, and the civil law vanishes, people banded together to help each other.
Yeah.
And you're not seeing this in New Orleans. You didn't see that in New Orleans, and now you're not seeing this in parts of London.
And that's true. I mean, Katrina is a great example of New Orleans. Within 2 weeks, displaced 500,000 people that had to move from one location to another. So we would expect a month later to see an unemployment rate rise by 500,000 people in our national statistics. But that didn't happen. The unemployment rate did not rise at all. It went from 5.2% to 5.2%, even though 500,000 people were completely displaced from their community. It showed you that they were not working, they were not having jobs, and they did not move to new jobs.
I think the Archbishop of Canterbury's point, and also the Bishop of London, is that this is sin, and the only real response to this sin is building a Christian society, reinforcing civic values, teaching virtue and character. Welfare state doesn't do that. A Christian worldview does.
I just saw that we published a brand new ordinal, and I wanted to get some feedback from. You were probably the guy in charge of making sure this came off well. Basically, from the start of ACNA, a few years back, this has been one of our main priorities: is to be sure that we have our doctrine and theology all in between the pages of a book. What's the primary changes now in the new ordinal as compared to maybe the 1979 Episcopal Church ordinal?
The 1979 ordinal is really discontinuous on the long history of Anglican ordinals. And maybe to set the stage for what we did, I'd say that my instructions to the Liturgy and Common Worship Task Force, which has some 20 individuals on it, just a wonderfully rich group of individuals who represent the whole church through the U.S. and Canada, my instructions to them were to produce what will eventually be a prayer book that so commends itself that people everywhere will want to use it. That's the principle that's underneath this work.
I noticed that there's certainly more of a connection with the 39 articles in our Anglican traditions.
I think the reason that the College of Bishops was in agreement with the recommendation that came from the Liturgy and Common Worship Task Force to begin with the ordinal was that there's very widespread agreement that the ordinal is, of all of the things in the 1979 prayer book, probably the most effective. And defective in the sense that it does not guard the faith and order of the church, that it's very weak on in its examination, and again, it's quite discontinuous on all of the previous prayer book ordinals. The ordinal that turned out to be the key from which the others from which the committee worked was actually the 1928, and it turned out the 1928 American, and it turned out to be the key because all of the references to the royal family had been removed. It didn't turn out to be the key because it was much different from earlier ordinals, except in that regard. But it made it unnecessary to rewrite many of the prayers. And again, for those who know their liturgics, they know that the 1962 Canadian ordinal, which again was very much in continuity with earlier ordinals, still has those references. Again, if one were to look at the ordinals from 1549 on, what you see is what's actually very much present in our new ordinal. Key things in the new ordinal were to give the ordinal a context, a beginning point that was more nearly what liturgical scholars are convinced is the place we ought to begin, that is with acclamation and collect for purity, and the inclusion of an Old Testament reading. But if you actually look at the place where we deal with where the ordination rite begins, what you find is in contemporary language, contemporary idiom, you find the historic rite. The principal changes within the rite are simply the change from thou to you, from 16th century idiom to 21st century idiom in the reference to God, and you find phrases that were difficult to understand, or words that have a very different meaning now from what they had in the 16th century. You find a more contemporary choice of words. Again, none of it is an attempt to actually change the meaning of the words, but quite the contrary, to preserve the meaning of the original words. One of the best examples of that, if folks wanted to look at the ordinal, would be to look at the beginning of the examination, the exhortation and examination, that great work of Cranmer's, the first sentence of which is very hard if you look at the 1662 or even the 1928, very hard to understand. If you look at what our task force has done and the College of Bishops has approved, what you see is very plain language that begins and says effectively, you have heard in the sermon just preached, you have discerned in the discernment which brought you to the day, and you have heard in Holy Scriptures these things which are expectations of you. If you read the original, you'll find that that's what it means, but you really have to study the sentence to figure out that that's what's being stated.
Did you ever make anything happen? Anything you couldn't explain? You're a wizard, Harry.
I'm a what?
So, our third story, George, is one that's taken almost a dozen years to fruition. Harry Potter. We just had that final Harry Potter. You have 2 daughters. I have 2 daughters. Harry Potter is the modern teenage sensation, but in literary form.
The day it came out, I know you and we both went to the movies at midnight with our children.
That's right.
They had to see it.
Yes, I mean...
My girls, I have twins, they're 15. It's been part of their life for the last 12 years.
Sure. And I remember the decision I had to make as a father. Do I let my young daughter read a book about wizards? And what kind of effect will it have on her long term? And is it more about the story, or is it more about the plot, or what trumps what? And I said, okay, read it, see what happens.
Now, I know some people poo-poo these things, but the occult is a real problem.
Sure.
It is a road to damnation and destruction, and people who get involved in you start with Ouija boards and tarot cards and these sort of teen kookiness, and it just can lead and does lead, and I've seen it in my work as a minister, as a priest, into destroyed lives, people who are just overcome by the evil that the occult can bring. Is Harry Potter, because it has wizards and witches, the occult? No, it's not.
No. And we've seen with The Lord of the Rings, we've seen with other books, Chronicles of Narnia, books can certainly have entertaining characters who are wizards and or demonic for all essential reasons. But in this form, the message trumps the story.
I never wanted any of you to die for me. Come on, Tom. Let's finish this the way we started. Together.
And we see that with almost the Christ-like nature of Potter in the final book.
Harry Potter has so much Christian imagery that the use of magic is more of a mechanical device to get the plot moving along. But as you say, the deeper meanings, the lessons that it's teaching about friendship, about loyalty, about good, about evil, are all virtues that a Christian should applaud and should encourage. It is what it is. It's not the greatest literature ever done. I've enjoyed it. It's entertaining, but it is not in any way harmful. And perhaps it's actually good for young people to have them think about these issues.
Sure. And it's also proof of the concept that if you want to become a famous author, you have to create a whole new world. C.S. Lewis had to do that with Narnia. Tolkien had to do that with Lord of the Rings. And our good friend J.K. Rowling just did that with Harry Potter.
And the most important thing of all, why we can talk about it, she's an Episcopalian.
That's Scottish right. She's from Scotland. Oh, my goodness. Well, I hope she's a fan of Unscripted then.
Yes, our biggest contributor, isn't she?
That's right. All right, it's been a wonderful week. These have been great stories, George, and I'll catch you the same place, same time next week.
Thanks.
Okay. All right. Anglican TV started a new show 4 weeks ago.
A new show
called Anglican Unscripted, and we instead of me flying around and interviewing people, I try to get them on Skype. And
this works. It's easy for me too.
It's easy for you, and it gives us more time to do quick interviews, especially if you have breaking news or something like that. Where
breaking news. We're glad when there's no breaking news.
That's right. So we're going to
We've
try
had
this.
enough breaking news in the last 8 years.